One way of trying to achieve that common understanding is to make sure that I am applying good listening techniques, meaning I am actively listening, I am making sure that I'm hearing what the other person is saying, and I'm hearing through nonverbal communication what the other person is not saying, and I'm capturing all of that information. So there are a couple of concepts that have to do with listening that I think we can apply to help make sure that we are getting the message, and many of these things are well known, others less so. One of the things that we often hear about is active listening. Active listening is the technique to make sure that the other individual recognizes that you are truly listening to them, and it's a way of giving them signals that they are important. Active listening has a lot of nonverbal components to it, things such as maintaining good eye contact. Actually, let's be careful here, maintaining culturally appropriate eye contact, because there are cultures in which it is considered impolite to look the other person directly in the eye. Western cultures, especially America, it is very common, or very, very normal that you say, well, by looking the other person in the eye, you're actually signaling to them. They can read your eyes better and recognize that you are interested in what they are saying. Eye contact is a very big one, again, culturally appropriate. Nodding agreement is another one, whereas you have to be careful that within the correct culture, you are signaling the correct things, that this is yes and this is no, or vice versa, whatever the culture is that you're dealing with. These are ways of ensuring that the other person recognizes you're actually listening to what they're saying. Verbal cues. Verbal cues are simple things like, yep, yeah, yeah, or no, yeah, Those are verbal cues. They may be non-words, but they're actually, again, giving the other person signals that you're truly listening to what they are saying and you are processing what they are telling you. And you have to make sure, by the way, that what you are giving them for verbal cues is really in sync with what they would like to hear or what you want to express. It doesn't have to be what they want to hear, but if they're saying something you disagree with and you start going, oh, no, something like that, you're really sending the signals that, okay, this is a topic we may need to discuss further about. Paraphrasing is a great technique in active listening, and one that is very often presented as a great tool for ensuring that you are understanding what the other person's saying. It's actually one of those tools that we would say is going to contribute to that common understanding. The word paraphrasing means something very specific. It does not mean repeating the words back that the person said verbatim. I actually had that happen to me. I lived in Germany for many years, and when I came back to the U.S., I was having a conversation with a young lady in the cocktail party, and I said something obviously very deep, and she repeated it back to me word for word. My reaction was, yeah, that's what I said. Is this a hearing test, or what is this? The much better method for paraphrasing is not to use their words, but to sum up in your own words what you think they said. And if they can listen to your words and agree that that is exactly the message they were trying to get across, you're a whole lot closer to having achieved that common understanding. Well, beyond the active listening, there's another concept that's fairly recently come up called informational listening. And informational listening is about making sure that you are not just hearing all of the words, but you're really clearly hearing the words that are important, the words that convey most of the message. This is something that's very, very important for people in the espionage or intelligence business, because quite often very specific words might be the tipping point for an entire conversation. And because of that, we say words matter. And in informational listening, you're trying to listen to the entire message and make sure that you are garnering the essence of the conversation that is critical to making sure that you know the pieces that you really needed out of the conversation. That's what informational listening is, and it's a relatively new concept. I'd highly suggest that you go out and do some research on it, because it's going to help you get more information out of your interviews or out of your conversations than if you're just participating in active listening. It's mainly making sure that you are going to walk away with the information you need in spite of all the other things that the person might have said that were not necessarily contributing to your question or to giving you the information you needed. There's another concept in listening. It's called Highway 350. It's based on scientific studies that indicate you can listen to another speaker speak at a rate of 500 words a minute and understand every single word they say. The average speaker speaks at a rate of 150 words per minute. It is leaving you with an unused capacity of 350 words at which you could listen that I cannot speak. And because of that, it's called Highway 350. It's down that road that your thoughts go zooming off towards the horizon, even as you're listening to every single word the other person says. Highway 350 in the context of listening techniques really is about how you utilize that unused capacity. If you're using the Highway 350 to think about follow-on questions, to try to integrate what I'm telling you into your body of knowledge, trying to make sure you understand correctly what I am saying, that's effective use of Highway 350. But if you're using Highway 350 to think about who's for dinner or what's for dinner or why dinner, anything like that, that is going to detract you or distract you from the message that I am sending. So the active use of Highway 350 is one of the things we should be paying a lot of attention to. There are a few things that get in the way of utilizing active listening effectively. One of them is a little thing called confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias is actually a brain function, and it is actually a tribal or a survival function of a group of people. Because what it really means is when you say something and I believe what you said to be confirming something that I know, I feel good, I feel like we have a bond, and because of that, this is a good thing. Confirmation bias leads us astray quite often because if we are faced with a situation of trying to communicate effectively, trying to understand what the other person is saying, and they're saying things with which we agree, we're going to start to interpret what they say in that context, and we're going to miss other nuances. They actually identified confirmation bias in some studies that were done using chess players from all levels of expertise, meaning beginners all the way up to the world masters, the best players in the world. And the way they did this is they set up a chess situation where there was a fairly common, fairly well-known move where you could achieve the result, which is a checkmate, within 5 moves. But in the same situation, there was a better solution in which you could achieve checkmate in 3 moves. What happened is people were looking at this, they saw the 5 move, whether they were beginning chess players or expert chess players, they could see the 5 move solution, and then they decided that was it, that was where they wanted to go. There was nothing else, there was no better way of doing it. They literally stated there was no better way with few exceptions. Confirmation bias blinds us to other alternatives. And that's its major problem. There's another problem with trying to become a good listener, and that is called emotional bias. Emotional bias is something I'm sure every one of you have experienced in conversations with your significant other, with your friends, with your family, when emotion gets in the way of interpreting words. Meaning, because you get either upset or you get in love, you get in any kind of emotional situation, the words that it would have a very different meaning in a different context are going to start to become part of that emotional discussion. And because of that, you may be missing, just like with confirmation bias, other alternative potential meanings for a specific statement or a specific word. The final problem that we have with distractors for active and informational listening is called the vividness effect. The vividness effect is what happens when we have experienced something that deeply moved us, that deeply impacted us. For my generation, Kennedy being assassinated was one of those moments where you know where you were, you know what you were doing exactly, and anytime anybody brings up that topic, there's part of your brain that is going back to that moment, recalling, reliving it, and trying to bring all of those facts back together. More recent events, things like 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center was another one that for many, many people that were living through that at that point in time, that meaning they were of an age where they were cognizant that this was happening. This is something that is burned into their brains, and because of that, it is going to distract you. If you're having a conversation and somebody brings up something that triggers the vividness effect, your mind is going to be at least partially distracted. Now, the whole idea behind bringing these things up is not to say, oh, I can't succeed with active or informational listening or Highway 350 anyway because of these impediments. The reason for bringing them up is make sure that you are aware of them, make sure that you recognize them, but try to make sure that it does not distract you from the goal of your conversation, of your meeting, which, if you're trying to get to requirements, is trying to make sure that you share a common understanding with the individual who is giving you the information that you want. The final thing on having conversations with the subject matter experts or with anybody else is to make sure that there's a saying, always leave them laughing. It might not be appropriate in all situations, but ending on a high note, I think, is a better way of expressing it. And that is making sure that when you're done with the conversation, both parties feel good about what went on. They feel like this was a conversation that advanced the cause, that you got the information you needed. They feel like they have contributed to your project or to your undertaking, and so they feel good about it. So making sure that you are prepared from the beginning to end the conversation on a high note and walk away with everybody feeling better about what was said and what happened in the meeting. One of the ways to do that is if you are taking notes on what they were saying, if you're capturing the conversation in any way, shape, or form, whether you're recording it, writing it down, jotting it down, typing it into your computer, or whatever else, at the end of the meeting, share that with them. Obviously, if you're recording it, both of you probably don't want to sit through that whole recording again immediately afterwards. So it might be a good practice to email them a copy of the recording. If you took interview notes, email them a copy of that. I like to give the other individual an opportunity to see what I got out of the conversation, what is going to become part of the official record, meaning it's going to be in the requirements document, or it's going to be in the product backlog as a user story, as a feature, or whatever else it is, so that they have an opportunity to look at that and say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Or they have the opportunity to come back and say, well, that's not quite what I meant. I really meant this. Can we make a change to that? Gives us both an opportunity to agree that this is something that we want to make sure is correct before we move forward. Having a final conversation or having a closure to my conversation is a really good way of ending on a high note. And by the way, if it's appropriate, I still always leave them laughing.